Information, education, and motivation. Real life, real topics. Welcome back to Cayman Conversations. Now streaming on Cayman Times Facebook and YouTube channels, and also live on Bobo FM 89.1. Today will be the final set of conversations for season one. We have chosen to replay two great conversations from this season, and they are Mr. Roy Bodden and through with me, and hazard management talking about preparation for hurricane season. Season two will return on September 4 in time for the highlights on the height of the hurricane season. We thank all our guests and listeners for spending their time with Cayman Conversation on our first season. Cayman Conversation seeks to elevate the level of media conversations and will enhance our conversation with high quality audio and video and also a call-in segment when we return. Remember to like, share, and follow Caymanian Times social media pages and also pick up copies of our free newspaper on Wednesdays and Fridays at locations across the islands. Cayman Conversations is a production of the Caymanian Times newspaper. On behalf of my engineer Lance, have a great weekend and summer holidays and see you in September. And now, on with the show. Afternoon, Mr. Roy, and welcome back to Cayman Conversation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moderator, publisher, and brainchild of this important venture. It's growing in importance and respect and viewership, and I'm proud to be a part of it. You're making me famous. Thank you.
No, we all make each other famous. Also, we're making the listeners famous. 89.1 FM Bobo radio station has been really picking up with our listeners, and they're in all walks of life. We have feedback from government agencies, from private homes, from offices. So we're looking forward to great things. But I'm so excited about today's conversation because I am back in school. I'm going to learn so much, so much.
Good place to be.
Yes. I've always had a concern about this. I did history in class. I probably did pass it. I didn't do too well, but probably did pass it. But the discovery of the Caribbean has always been something I've been thinking about and talking about. And the story about Christopher Columbus discovering the Caribbean. And just last week we celebrated Discovery Day, and I thought back to my conversations, and we had a conversation with some friends about the rediscovery of the Cayman Islands, and that there were people here in the Cayman Islands before. Can you sort of confirm or verify or enlighten on what really took place?
Well, Ralph, eminent historians shy away. As a matter of fact, they pour cold water on the idea that Christopher Columbus discovered these islands. Certainly, he didn't discover the Cayman Islands. So it's a misnomer and an error in history for us to celebrate Discovery Day under the auspices of it being of these islands being discovered by Christopher Columbus. What is more accurate, and that historians accept, is that he sighted the island. He sighted the island of Cayman back on May 1503. But these islands had been traversed long before Christopher Columbus by the Taino peoples, the Arawaks, coming from Guyana and Venezuela on their way to Cuba and the Bahamas. And this was a stopover for them. These islands was a stopover because up to this point, there is no evidence of any permanent settlement, not even by the Arawaks, by the Taino people. But we know they stopped here in transit, as we would say now. So that should set to rest all the errors about Christopher Columbus discovering these islands. They existed long before him in the civilizations of other persons.
Okay, very well. Who were the first settlers? Can you remember?
Well, again, there is a number of versions. People say that the first settlers were really we know that they were from Jamaica. Now, whether they were deserters from Cromwell's army, which many people say, old Isaac Borden settled at a place on the east, which was named Old Isaac's. He settled there, and he may have been a white person, but shortly after that, they were black people. Black people came. So many people think that these white settlers brought their slaves with them. And in addition to that, it was possible that runaway slaves came because it was not inconceivable. Cayman at that time was not far in geographical terms from Western Jamaica, St. James and Westmoreland, and even St. Elizabeth. So we know that history, and if you read Michael Creighton, Founded Upon the Seas, though, we know that the first kind of semi-permanent people were the land grant settlers who came between the years 1735 to 1742. And these were persons holding what were called letters patent to cut hardwoods from the interior of Cayman, mahogany, ironwood, from where they shipped to Jamaica and then onward to the UK to make furniture. So those were, and many of them were women holding these letters patent to develop this land.
Very, very interesting.
So that's from the 18th century, 1735 to 1742. And thereafter, that was a kind of spasmodic settlement. Thereafter, it took on more of a permanence, which we know, of course, that the Cayman Islands came into the British Empire in the year 1670, when it was ceded to Great Britain after Britain defeated Spain and the Treaty of Madrid was signed. Spain ceded the Cayman Islands over to Britain. Britain had conquered Jamaica, captured Jamaica from 1655, but Cayman came along only 1670.
Okay. So there were slaves in the Cayman Islands from a long time ago, from what we hear.
Oh yeah, they were slaves. As a matter of fact, the first record of slaves in Cayman was a record of a Dutch ship captured, a Dutch privateer captured a French ship and brought about 500 slaves here to the Cayman. We don't know what happened to them, but we presume that they were dispersed. Some may have stayed here, but the rest may have been dispersed because remember now, we never had sugar plantations here. And it was not long after that some semblance of a cotton plantation system came about. But that was the first recorded entry of slaves on these islands. And then, of course, settlers from Jamaica brought their slaves. And in addition to that, some black people found their way here independently. What we do know is that the settlements were on the east and south side of the island, Borden Town, East End. Why was that? Because this side had the reefs, which protected the islands from marauders. Georgetown and West Bay were frequently invaded by the Spanish from Cuba, and they had no reefs to protect them. So the first permanent settlements were on the east and south side.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. And I love history, and it's just to emphasize the importance of knowing what happened before. Can you speak to when the Christians came? To understand that the United Church of Jamaica is sent over the first Christian missionary to the islands?
No, but before them, they were Anglicans. The Anglicans were the first established religion. Indeed, the site that the Presbyterian Church of Georgetown is now, the Presbyterians bought that from the Anglicans. Anglicans established a mission here, but it failed. It failed because they didn't have the same sense of community. And by the way, the people who settled here were the Scottish Presbyterians, not the British, not the English ones that we call the
Okay.
Episcopalians. They were the Scottish Presbyterians that
I
came
see.
here, and they were successful. They were successful. But in addition to that, um, shortly after they came, there were other religions came, but the Presbyterians were well established because they had more of a taking the church to the community, and so their congregations spread throughout the settlements that they were on Grand Cayman then.
I see. When we say that Cayman is a Christian community, looking back in history, we could also trace the roots of Christianity to when we were settled from those
So
days.
here is the historian's interpretation of that. Cayman is a Christian community only in the sense that there were Christians here. But you understand that we were a frontier society. And these people here never had much time for churches, really, because it was a hard living they had. They had to fight against infestation of mosquitoes. They had to fight against hurricanes and all that stuff. But they did have a sense of religion, and they did have a sense that there was a God. But the behaviors of many people were very unchristian-like, because particularly in the era of slavery, and that was one of the things that slaves had everywhere, because they said the Bible says that all men are created equal. Well, if all men are
Yeah.
created equal, why is it that the black people are the slaves of the white people? And so, yeah, Cayman was a Christian community. I would say it is more accurately expressed that Caymanians had a sense of Christianity,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
because one of the Presbyterian missionaries complained, Pope Waddell, he was passing here on a ship on a Sunday, and that's how the Presbyterians came to settle here. He was passing Cayman on a ship on a Sunday, and the Caymanian people rowed out to the ship in their boats wanting to sell them turtle on a Sunday. And Waddell was very concerned about that. And when he went back to the United Kingdom and came back to Jamaica, he said, we have to establish a mission down there to Christianize those people because they are godless.
I see. Yes. The pirates that came aboard here, that came ashore here, did they arrive before the settlers, before the settlement, or before?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I don't know why they celebrate Pirates Week. They're giving us misinformation, Ralph. We were
Okay.
not a haven for pirates. Port Royal in Jamaica was until the earthquake, and the Bahamas. But the Cayman Islands, no. And so that is what is dangerous about Caymanian history and Caymanian culture. The architects, the people who purport to be architects, are ignorant of the history and culture of these islands. We had a few pirates here, like Neil Walker. They came here. Why did they come here? To beach their boats for repairs and to get fresh water. And during that short stay, they may have buried some, but we were not a haven like the Bahamas were and that like Port Royal was. It was only an informal kind of relationship they had with these islands. One of
Okay.
the advantages they had hiding out here was that the islands were very low, and you couldn't see them until you were right upon them. And so
Right.
the pirates found that convenient when they were running, but they didn't establish any permanent base here. And we certainly didn't descend from pirates. Certainly not the black people, because I would say without fear of successful contribution, there are few people in the Cayman Islands who are steeped in this history as much as I am. And there is no evidence that there was any piracy of any large scale. That's a figment of certain ignorant white people's imagination.
Okay. Very, very. Tell us, there's stories about a lot of mosquitoes and crocodiles in the
Definitely,
Cayman and turtles.
definitely that is true. Well, Columbus, because of the large numbers of turtles in the waters, he called it Las Tortugas. That's where it got the
Okay.
name Las Tortugas. The Arawaks, the Taino people, call them Caymanos. That's where our name comes from. Caymanos, because the Caymans is a kind of crocodile, and we had saltwater crocodiles here. As a matter of fact, there are people that are saying that it is not unusual and not unlikely that that saltwater crocodiles swam from Cuba to these islands.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we got the name Las Tortugas from Columbus and the turtles in the water, and from the Taino or Arawak people from the large numbers of crocodiles that came in. And as for the mosquitoes, always an infestation of what we call salt marsh mosquitoes, which we still have.
That's good.
The good thing was
Yes.
that they were not disease-bearing mosquitoes. Otherwise, people on the frontier would have been wiped out a long time ago.
Yeah. Our proximity to Cuba, and as we speak, many times Cuba comes up. We're very close. When you look at the map, Cayman
90
Brackage,
miles, we were
a
100 and
few miles.
something miles away.
Yes, not far. Is there a close connection between Cuba and the Cayman Islands?
Definitely, definitely. I talk about the diaspora, the Caymanian diaspora. We had close,
Yes.
our first diaspora, the first, the first immigration, Emigration, immigration of Caymanians were in the 1830s to the Bay Islands of Honduras, Guanaja, Utila, and Roatan. And after the economy crashed in the 1830s, Caymanians went down there by the hundreds and settled on these islands. And that's where you have all the Caymanians named now. All the names we have. Rivers, Ebanks, Watlers, Bush, Bawdens, all of them. You still have them represented on the Bay Islands.
Yes.
Then, in the 1840s, the second diaspora from the 1840s on was to Cuba, especially the Isle of Pines, where Caymanians went to work on the plantations and the citrus groves. Interestingly, my own family from my mother's side, we that's where my diaspora in Cuba. My mother was born and spent her formative years in Cuba. So I know about the Cuban diaspora. And we had the whole members of our family. As a matter of fact, some of our people are still there. Some of them been in the Cuban armed forces. And then what a lot of Cayman people don't know, there was a third wave who went to Miami, Florida, when Flagler was building the railway. Those were people mainly from West Bay that went to work in Florida on the railway when Flagler was building the railway in Miami. So that is why Caymanians really should be careful how they're prejudiced against outsiders, because we as a people, we went everywhere. Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia, Cuba, Jamaica, and then Florida, the United
Okay.
States, the Cayman
And,
diaspora. But
yeah.
nobody speaks about that. Nobody speaks about the diaspora. We have as many people in the diaspora, Ralph, as we have Caymanians here now, and probably more, because we're outnumbered in Cayman. But if we would take all the Caymanians with Caymanian connections in the United States, in Cuba, in Central America, you'd be
Yes.
surprised how many there are. When I was the Minister of Culture from 2000 to 2005, I went on an official visit to Cuba, and my contact was the Vice Minister of Culture in Cuba. He told me at that time, in 2003, that they had a register in the Isle of Youth. Now we used to call it the Isle of Pines, Isla de
Yes.
Juventud, that they had a register of 30,000 people with Caymanian connections. You hear what I'm telling you? 30,000
30,000.
people with Caymanian
Yes.
connections in 2003.
That's very interesting. And, with things getting worse over there and the challenges to immigrating to the US getting more difficult, you might see some boats coming this way.
Well, when the late Benson Ebanks was a minister, that's we had a a whole ingress of people with Caymanian connections coming from Cuba. Officially, they settled down in West Bay, Swabies and Ebanks and Rivers and Poweries and all that. Yeah, people with Caymanian connections repatriated back here.
Yes, I remember our good friend Mario Ebanks. I think he speaks of his
That's right.
journey
And that
from
was
Cuba many,
and
many
that was not
times.
even all. That was not even all. Yeah.
Yes. So so there is a connection, and I
Oh,
and we and yes, go ahead, sir.
and there has always been. I mean, I know in Port Town, for example, MK Management went to school there. One of my grand aunt, she went to a culinary school in Havana, and has her certificate. My cousin was telling me, Ginger was telling me a couple of years ago that she found that Nessie certificate where she graduated from a culinary school in Havana. So Kemanans went there, and they didn't only stay in drudge work, but as immigrants everywhere. By the second generation, they had worked themselves up.
Yes, it's very interesting. Very interesting. A little bit on immigration, as we know, we have many immigrants coming to the Cayman Islands, and it's a worldwide state of life where everyone's immigrating. I immigrated from Montserrat to the Cayman Islands, and same way Caymanians immigrated other places for better life and for opportunities. And this is something that I see will continue. What is your thoughts about the immigration to the Cayman Islands and
Well,
where our
let me put it into historical perspective by saying that immigration, the way it is now, is a phenomenon brought on by what is called globalization. Globalization. And I read a book years ago by a Japanese author called Kenichi Oma, who talked about the borderless world. So there's a world now with no borders. So it's very fluid. People move in and out and up and down. Globalization for us in Cayman, which is the subject of my book, one of the things I discuss in my book that I'm working on now. Globalization for us really happened when Caymanian men went to sea. 1,000 Caymanian men were at sea. That was the beginning of globalization. We benefited from it because our men went out and they repatriated, the remittances came back. And that's how the Cayman Islands that began the economic boom. Because after they sent the remittances, then the banks came. Because at that time, there were there were there were no commercial banks. And all this money, because these seamen got paid in US dollars. But there was nothing
yes,
here to cash the money, and we had exchange regulations. The only bank was the government savings bank. And because of all this money, Barclays Bank came from Jamaica in 1953. 10 years later, Royal Bank came because there were literally hundreds of thousands of dollars coming in here each month. And so that was the beginning of globalization. Then after the seamen, tourists found the place in large numbers. Now, immigration is a contentious subject, and it should be because, and I'm very sensitive to this as a Caymanian, and I write about it. But I'm a nationalist, and you have to understand that the Cayman Islands has always been a kind of closed society. We were on the periphery of the British Empire, and they left us alone. So we only had few people from the outside coming in. We lived pretty much as we wanted to live. As a matter of fact, they complained about us and called us the lawless Caymaners because we made our own laws and appointed our own governors. Now, when the 20th century came and the boom came, we got unrestricted immigration, although our legislators tried to restrict it. Well, there was always a sensitivity because we were not heavy procreators. The men spent years at sea. The families were not large by some by certainly by third world standards.
yes,
And so we always run the risk of being outnumbered. And now the problem has come to hit us smack in the face. And it's a moral problem. It's a moral problem because should we close the door? Should we have restrictions? Yes, but we can't be unfair. We have to let some people in. However, what we didn't do, Ralph, is we didn't prepare our own people. And up to now, we have a failing education system. As you will see, you will have seen the report couple of compasses ago. So we didn't train and prepare our people for worldwide competition. And that's what happened to our seamen. We didn't know that the ships were moving from analog systems to digital systems, and we didn't prepare our sailors so that where you need 30 men to man an engine room when it was an analog instrumental system, you only needed 10 when they became digitized. And so that's what's happening now. When we were in a position, we didn't invest in training accountants or attorneys or business managers because we thought it would all. So these people are coming in now and they're more prepared and trained than we are. And so we're on a treadmill because we need them for the economic system to continue. Therefore, we can't shut the door on them. I don't know how we are going to come to grips with the dilemma because we can't slow the economy down. We can't stop immigration. So we have to come up with some kind of manpower needs assessment and try to play catch up.
And with the phrase, the horse already out of the barn, so we can't get it back.
That's right. The Jenny is already out of the bottle, I say.
Yes, I've always said, as a immigrant, as someone who came from Montserrat to this island and made it home, I I believe, and in my heart, that we have to share the pie. We cannot sideline the Caymanian people. We came to a country where we met them. They welcomed us. They provided employment for us, and we did our part. We proved our worth. But at the same time, we have to accept that we can't sideline the Caymanian people. We have to
Well,
learn to live with
well, if you
them.
try to do that, you're going to have trouble.
Yes,
And that's one of the arguments I make in my book now.
yes,
Unless we get a more practical solution than we have now, the society is going to crumble. And I say that the solution is not an economics. It's not. It's a morality problem. How are we going to be fair? How are we going to respect the people who are here first? I don't talk about indigenous Caymanians because there were no indigenous Caymanians. I talk about established Caymanians because there are people who are established here because of the many years they've been settled here. They have certain, and I have a whole section about ancestral privileges and ancestral rights and this whole idea of entitlement. I believe that people who've been here for generations definitely have entitlement. Definitely they should have advantages over people who just came here. Because remember, the people who were established here, particularly the black people, peoples like myself, people of African descent, we came here against our will. And so there's this, I address this whole argument about entitlement because
yes,
people talk about Caymanians are entitled. Of course they should feel entitled because if you are not entitled in your country of birth, in your jurisdiction, where are you going to be entitled? So
yes,
Caymanians, if you look at the great United States, you know, they says there are American citizens and the others are aliens. So I wouldn't. I mean, Gerard called them aliens, and he warned us against it. And there's a whole debate now surrounding the business of who owns the land, because we
yes,
didn't understand that if you own the land, you own the economy, you own the country. And so we gave up. We sold our absolute right to the land when we sold absolute titles to the land, which we should not have done. No foreigner should be able to own absolute titles to land in Cayman. They should be able to own a leasehold, yeah, but not absolute title. So that's my position, and that's why we were in the quandary. And I make no apologies for that. Absolutely none. Absolutely none. But Caymanians are nationalistic. They're not anti-foreign. It's just that they're nationalistic. They realize, look, this is our little piece of this is our little rock. So we there should be no objection to sharing it, but we have to be first among the equals. Primus inter pares, The Latins called it. So Caymanians must be first in Cayman. There should be no one above us in Cayman. We
I
should be
look for
well.
I look forward to reading your book. So when is it going to come out?
Well, probably not until 2025 because it's a complex work. It has maps and photographs and arguments, and I want it peer reviewed by other because it's going to be shocking
Yes.
when it's published. A lot of people are going to be shocked at the positions I take. You know,
And I appreciate your candidness and your honesty. Not many people will say what you say in public, and that's really something I admire you for and I respect you for. We all have a say, and we all should be
so
able to
so
speak
so
our mind.
I'm not against expatriates. I'm not against that
I
because
know,
I
I know
told you
that.
before. I told you before,
Yes,
as Caymanians, we expatriated ourselves
yes.
because of economic means too, because we went seeking a better lifestyle. So I'm not against that. I'm not against that. I'm just saying we have to find a way to be equitable, and we can't afford, Ralph, to give up our birthright, and then we are left holding nothing, and that's why I get angry and I talk about expatriates who curse us, who say we're fools and we're entitled and we're not capable. Well, I would issue a challenge to any. I would debate any of them and hold my own. I would debate any of them and more than hold my own because I saw I saw what it needed for Caymanians to cope, and that's why I don't believe in affirmative action. I don't believe that you should get a job because you're a Caymanian. I believe you should get a job because you're capable, and it should be a meritocratic society. But unfortunately, for some reason, especially the white people, they come here and they get the advantage.
Maybe that time for a debate will come. You never know. Maybe sooner or
Oh, I'm
later.
sure it will. Well, we should have the debate. We should have the debate.
I would like to switch gears a bit. We have another 15 minutes. And let's talk about culture. And the reason why I asked you to have this discussion with me is because I had a gentleman, his name is Craig. I don't think he might mention his name. And we were talking about culture of carnival. And what he said is, Ralph, this is my culture. You know, this is what I know. I don't know about the other things like Pirates Week and before that. I know about this culture of Cayman. This is my culture of Carnival. And I am not making excuses for it, he said. He said that this is what I know and this is what I want to enjoy. I don't want to enjoy the old type culture. I don't know it. And so I want to get your views on that kind of mental and that kind of, expressions.
Well, we said earlier, that the islands were not an islands of pirates. So Pirates Week is anathema to our culture. It is foreign to our culture. That is a creation of people. I understand it came about because in the interregnum between the end of one tourist season and the beginning of another, there was a dry spot. And someone came up with the idea of having this special carnival, which would be an attraction so that the hotels and the restaurateurs could get some business. But it has no solid foundation in the history, in the in the cultural makeup of these islands. What would be more like our culture is a celebration called John Canoe. Now, John Canoe was a celebration that we held in Bordentown up to the 1950s. It comes out of it comes out of slavery. It's an African animist celebration in which the characters dress up as different characters. They have a band and they have a parade. Now, the United Church used to hold what they call a garden party on the 1st of August. Not 1st of August, New Year's Day, not 1st of August, on New Year's Day. New Year's Day was Garden Party Day. That's the day the John Canoes came. And they came from Gun Square down the road with their top band down to the garden party. at the end of the Bordentown and Mance Road. John Canoe is celebrated in Cuba. It's celebrated in Western Jamaica, and it's celebrated in the Bahamas. And it used to be celebrated in Cayman. And again, I was telling you about the conversation I had with the Vice Minister of Cuba. We were planning a big John Canoe carnival. Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Cayman. John Canoe is our cultural celebration. Not even Barabano. Barabano is a recent import. That kind of carnival comes, as you would know, Ralph, from the Eastern Caribbean and from Trinidad.
Yes.
But even that is more appropriate to Cayman than Pirates Week, because at least it's Caribbean. But John Canoe is definitely Caymanian.
Would you say that culture is dynamic because times are changing? People are born in different
Of course,
eras.
but of course, culture is dynamic, and we have to depend on outside people, including the expatriates, to keep up that dynamism. So the infusion of the expatriate people, along with what we have, makes our culture dynamic. It makes it vibrant. It makes it alive. But having said that, let me hasten to add, many expatriate people will try to make Caymanians believe that Cayman has no culture. Nothing could be further from the truth, because Caymanians have tradition, we have heritage, and we have culture. Okay? So let me make the distinction. What is our heritage? We have a seafaring heritage. Heritage is a little different from culture. Okay? So, and tradition again is different. But we definitely have a culture. We have a culture. Yeah, it's dynamic and it's ever evolving.
And I personally believe there's nothing wrong with having new cultures, but we should always remember where we came from. We should always try to have some record of our cultures in the past, of our history, our background,
What
and where we have developed from. It is important.
what
We cannot
our
forget
weak,
where we came from.
our weakness is, Ralph, that we don't have enough of these things recorded. It is only now that we are becoming interested enough in our history, our background, our heritage, and our culture to be writing about it. And that's the weakness. We are miles behind Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, and Guyana, who have theirs written and documented, and who have personalities who are made famous by their expertise. And that's why we can be mesmerized by these people from what I call the metropolitan countries, the white people. And I want to say something else too, which is controversial. There's a battle going on here. I call it a clash of cultures. Because the first thing these people do, they try to disenfranchise us by telling us we have no history and no culture. And then they use that to strip us of other things, including our land and our identity and all these kind of things. So there's some big culture wars going on here. I had two young men call me up and tell me they're working at these offices, and these people from overseas are telling them that Cayman has no culture. Oh, we had to come here to bring you culture. So they called me and say, well, we know that you're a historian, sir. What should we tell them? So I tell them they're wrong. They're wrong. They didn't have to come here to bring us culture. We have culture, and they're nothing but a glorified set of economic migrants. They're coming here looking a livelihood, and I have nothing against that. But for heaven's sake, try to respect us.
And and that's my point. That's my point. We need to respect where we have decided to settle. Of course, we have rights, but I believe in respecting, where I have settled, the residents of this country. I admire them, and like I said, I believe that if there's a pie, we all need to have a part of the pie,
Of
and
course,
of
of
course,
course.
you have to ensure that Caymanians have
I
the
absolutely,
opportunities as well.
I absolutely agree with that. We should be looking to build a plural society. We
Yes.
should be looking to be inclusive because we don't want to go back to the days where in Cayman, when it was cut off as a frontier society, when each person had to marry their cousin because that was all the options were. We don't want to go back to that.
No.
So we need an infusion of outside people. But those people need to come being prepared to respect their hosts, and in return, the host should respect them as guests or visitors.
And we will finish on that topic, and that is respect is due for everyone. Mr.
Yes.
Roy, I want to thank you very much for spending some time with us and sharing your invaluable knowledge and that experience of history. I will never forget. We recorded in History and Cayman Conversation. Any final words, my friend?
Well, I just want to say that this is a beautiful place and a great time to be alive in Cayman. It has a good future, and it takes all of us to work at it. If I can put it in maritime perspective, pardon me, we are sailing on a ship, and in order not to run aground, it takes all of us to work at the position or the post that they have. And we have to cooperate and we have to respect one another. If we can succeed in doing that, we will thrive for many a year and keep our eyes focused. So we are a God-fearing people. Try not to be too decadent and to degenerate into much decadence.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to
Afternoon.
Cayman Conversations. How are we doing today?
Good.
Really good, thank you. How you doing, Ralph?
I'm doing great. I think we're just waiting for Mr. John. I'm sure he'll be here in a few minutes. Are you enjoying the weather?
Nice and moody day.
We love it. We love it. It's so as long as you have your rain mac and your umbrella, you're fine. But it's
It's
yeah,
true.
it's nice, moody, very moody
Okay.
day.
Great. Okay. Well, Daniel, can you tell us what you do at Hazard Management?
Okay, so hazard management for well, hello for all the listeners today. So hazard management, we're responsible for coordination of any national emergency. So obviously hurricane season is our biggest threat in the Cayman Islands. However, we also work with things from migration to oil spills to fire to earthquakes, tsunamis, anything that could become an emergency of a big proportion. Obviously, a lot of the agencies will focus, if it's a road traffic accident, for example, it may only be the police service or it may be the fire. But a lot of the times, because of our resources on the island, it'll become multi-agency, and that's where we get involved because we do a lot of coordination of that.
Yes. And I remember having many meetings during the pandemic.
Pandemic meeting, yeah, sorry, and pandemics,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Onisha, can you just give us an idea of what you do?
Sure. So I have the pleasure of being responsible for communications for the government. We sit in the cabinet office. So we're a Department of Communications. A lot of people are familiar with GIS. In 2021, the government made the decision to coordinate all communications. So we have the Strategic Communications Unit, what was known as GIS, and then internal communications all sit in what is now Department of Communications. So I have the pleasure of heading up that team and function. I think particularly for your listeners today is our function when it comes to crises. So what we're responsible for, of course, in those times is to ensure individuals are aware of what's happening, giving them safety information that can keep themselves and their families safe, and ensuring that's done on an ongoing and timely basis. So we head up the Joint Communication Services for the government, and that is an activated agency once there is a crisis declared. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do. It's really hard to kind of put it into a couple of words because depending on the
It's
hazard,
a very important job.
yeah, depending on the
Yes.
hazard, is how we act. But we have a really strong team. And I should note that Joint Communication Services is not just the Department of Comms. Once we activate in that function, all communicators across the public sector become a part of the structure to help us make sure all those messages are going out accurately and timely.
Okay, that's good.
I think just to add to
And
that, I
yeah.
mean, Anisha does it again. It's a tremendous communication is such an important aspect when it comes to any kind of large scale emergency. So sometimes under the obviously hazard management morphs into what we call the National Emergency Operations Center, and we coordinate that. But that's again multi-agency. But sometimes we'll be fully activated with all the 19 emergency support teams.
Yeah.
But a lot of the times it'll be much smaller. It'll be ourselves and a few other agencies, a few under teams under the National Emergency Operations Center. Communications is always going to be one of those because communications in any emergency is absolutely critical. If the gap's not being filled by government and the official sources, obviously there's a big reach for, people to fill the gap. And I think communications is absolutely critical in any emergency. Consistent messaging across the entire government and again shared with the wider public.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thanks.
And we could spend a little more time on communication while John gets ready to talk about the actual weather itself and the preparation for the hurricane season and what we should do. But one of the reasons that I'm here in media is because I'm really concerned about the level and the function of media in getting the message out. Because I understand, and I'm sure you agree, that it is important to get the right information all the time to the right people. And so, Anisha, just speak to that, please, how important it is that the information is accurately given at the right time.
That is critical because having the right information at the right time, we know saves lives, right? So it's incredibly important. And it's incredibly important that people in the media like yourselves are able to support us in ensuring that things are accurate. I think a lot of the struggle that the public has, and it's normal for any public, is that they want things, immediately or almost before it was thought of in some cases. But we're very, very focused on ensuring that it's accurate because accurate information is what's going to be important. So I think, when we talk about communications, particularly as they go with crises, we're trying to be as timely as possible. And we're definitely going to be accurate. That's our goal. One of the things that we know has been more beneficial for us, and we've changed over the past kind of 2 years, is to also have a frequency. Danny kind of mentioned that rhythm. And I think that the community can rely on the fact that we let them know that every 6 hours we're going to say something, even if there's nothing to say, just so they also get used to the rhythm of when will you get information, at least on an ongoing basis. We work closely with Radio Cayman as well to make sure that avenue we're putting out the same type of message. So there's consistency as well. The last thing we want for the community is that they're hearing different things in different places. So one of the strong points that we have from a JCS perspective is to ensure that all government is sending out the same information, and we're trusting our media partners to be in that with us, so that we're sending out the same accurate information together.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome Mr. John Tibbetts. John, welcome back. We were just asking our guests to just give a little description of the role and your responsibilities. Can you help us here?
Well, as head of the Cayman Islands National Weather Service, I am the lead voice, as it were, for the Meteorological Authority for the Cayman Islands. So a big part of my role is involved in monitoring the Atlantic Ocean and especially the Caribbean Sea for systems that may present some inclement weather that may be dangerous to the general public. And we not only pass that information on to the media sources, but we also pass those on to HMCI and the communication team. On some of the larger level systems, certainly. We wouldn't necessarily pass on, like, let's say you got a cold front come in, unless the cold front is a major one that is going to produce waves that are going to compromise the road traffic or the coastal road on Saginaw Beach. And part of that job also involves looking at the making sure that that we get the impacts down correct, and that we pass that information on as well.
Okay. Thank you, John. We were just talking about communication and how important it is, and as you know, just while we're waiting, and Misha gave her a little contribution. Can you just let us know how you feel about communication, the importance to get the right information at the right time?
Communication is absolutely critical. And I think when you're looking at the government agencies now, the government agencies are now having a communications officer as part of the team. Okay, so when you compose in the ministry, you must have a communications officer, so that the messages that are coming out from the ministry, coming out from the departments in that ministry, are all vetted and presented in the correct manner. Now, year in and year out, we continue to fight with other meteorological experts that post things on YouTube and Facebook and what have you, and they have a tendency to excite the public when there really isn't no need for excitement. Their forecasters have a tendency to forecast whatever the weather model says, they take it as gospel. And yet, in my experience, and if you ask any of the weather forecasters inside there, they will tell you that the weather models are often wrong. There are numerous times when they have forecasted massive hurricanes, massive rain events to come across the Cayman Islands, and nothing happens. Not only does nothing happen, but nothing even starts up. You know, from the Weather Service's point of view, as the director of the Weather Service, the weather model can tell me there's a strong low coming through, but I got to see that low form first, okay? Because I know the errors in the models, okay? And it isn't going to make good sense for us to be constantly crying wolf when there's no wolf, okay? And these other meteorologists who are posting things on YouTube, please understand something. They really have no accountability when you sit down and think about it, because no matter how many times they're wrong, the Cayman general public are not going to go and says they're wrong. They'll say they're wrong when the National Weather Service says they're wrong, because it is my job for the Cayman Islands people. It's my job for the Cayman Islands government. That is my role. All right. They are doing this on a private venture on the side, and there are no penalties for them being wrong.
Okay.
Okay. There are potential penalties for us in terms of our public not necessarily listening to us. Yeah. All right. And not reacting to warnings when we issue them. So that's the situation that we're in.
Okay. Danny, can you give us your input on this, please?
I think John's got a great point. I mean, at the end of the day, we can't be crying wolf all the time. We have to have a reasonable expectation that we're going to get impacted. But of course, with climate change and other things, you know, things change very, very quickly. It's a very, very dynamic playing field. When we're talking about storms in particular here, it's a very dynamic playing field. So that information getting out in a timely manner, verified, and again, we are following it and consistently updating it, is absolutely critical. I think John and I do both have the same pet peeve when it comes to these models that come and stress everyone out and actually have no factual basis. Because at the end of the day, you know, I think everyone's got enough stress in their lives these days. We certainly don't want to add to that. And I think one of the biggest things is to constantly put that stress out there. And of course, when you do have the big storms that, you know, are actually happening, you know, you become so exhausted from the whole thing. You're not actually going to respond as you should do. So we are very, very careful when we do any kind of, you know, activation of sorts through the forecasting and again through the National Emergency Operations Centre, to know that there really is a risk. I say that, but I also say, you know, we have over the last few years erred on the side of caution. So whereas sometimes in the past we may not have activated because it's a tropical storm, or we may not have activated because it wasn't anything of significant threat. We've actually changed that a bit over the last 2 years, and I think maybe COVID's made us a bit more sensitive to things, but also Tropical Storm Grace. I mean, again, that was much more impact than I think a lot of people expected, including ourselves, I think. So I think we've always, as the NEAC, the National Emergency Operations Centre, we tend to plan ahead, make sure we're ready to go and activate. But again, if things calm down during the night or things change dramatically, we will deactivate very quickly. We'd rather go full out and then pare back. And at the very least, it's a great exercise, training exercise for all of us working together, getting the best possible scenario. I mean, for COVID is a great example. I mean, obviously it was a pandemic as opposed to a storm, but we were activated for 104 days. So we've changed a lot over the last couple of years as to how we work together and how we are streamlined and how we're making sure we're getting the best out of our multi-agency response. We've done a lot more training even this year with all our key players in the National Emergency Operations Centre. So I think there's that I wouldn't ever call anything's over preparing. I think it's being ready, being very ready to go no matter what the emergency is. But again, paring back and being constantly reassessing that situation. And I think that, again, for the public, we strongly encourage the public to do the same thing. If there is a storm coming, for example, and it looks only to be a tropical storm, well, just be aware that that can change very dramatically, very, very quickly. And I think, again, with climate change, we're seeing this rapid intensification much more so than we have done in the past.
Okay, thank you. I mean, we're going to get back into those details in a bit, but let's talk about the weather. We're now into June, in that time of year when we all prepare for the worst.
No, well, let me correct you for that. We prepared that the whole year.
Yes, always prepared.
Always prepared, right? Well, Mr. John, we're going to call you back on the front stage again, just to let us know what are we expecting, or what are the plans for this year, or what are the forecasts for this year?
Okay, when the experts are out there looking to produce a prediction for the season, they start to look at the various atmospheric factors that determine hurricanes and the level of the hurricanes for the season. So first on the agenda is usually the El Nino-La Nina cycle. Okay. So all of the predictions up until this point have said, hey, listen, we're forecasting that an El Nino will will develop this year. Okay. This morning, I got a message from NOAA. NOAA is now officially advising us that that is no longer a forecast. That is now a fact. The El Nino is here. Okay. Now, what is El Nino and what does it do? All right. The El Nino is basically a warming of the eastern Pacific Ocean. Okay. And the impact that it has on the Atlantic Basin is generally, it has a tendency to cap the development of the hurricane season. Okay. It usually produces wind shear. Okay. And the wind shear has a tendency to tear apart thunderstorms, which are the lifeblood of hurricanes. Okay. So congratulations, I gave you the good news part of this. There's a little bit of bad news on it. And that is there's a competing situation, and that is that the sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean are above normal. Okay, so we got one thing fighting against an active season, and something else fighting for an active season. All right, and we're going to kind of have to see how this plays out. In the sense that we're going to need to see where exactly and how extensive the wind shear patterns are with regards to the El Nino pattern. And we're going to see how that impacts the various systems as they try to form up. In terms of the prediction, we look at two different sources. We look at Colorado State, and we look at NOAA. Okay, NOAA says we're going to have an average season. Colorado State says we're going to have an average season. Now, I will tell you that the April forecast that came out from Colorado actually had the named storms, the hurricanes, and the major hurricanes all below the average numbers. Their June prediction brings them up a little bit. So the prediction from Colorado State, June forecast, named storms, 15, hurricanes, 7, major hurricanes, 3. Now, if I'm looking at the long-term averages, that 15 is just over the average. The average is 14.4. The average of major hurricanes is 7.2. So the prediction on the number of hurricanes is actually a smidget below. And then the major hurricanes, the long-term average is 3.2. Prediction at 3. So we kind of have almost a pure definition of what an average season was. There's very little difference between what the long-term averages is and what is being predicted. Okay. Now, note, obviously, season gets very interesting. The first tropical system that was regarded by the National Hurricane Center for this season actually happened in January. Okay. And then we have Arlene developing in the Gulf of Mexico and doing all kind of scary things and what have you. But at the end of the day, it dissipated and did not cause us any trouble. So we will now continue on and wait for the next system to form.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. John. Onisha, communication. Is this information being passed out to the community regarding the preparations, the forecasts, and what is your feedback from the community? Are they accepting it? Are they getting enough information? In your experience, is the information that is being put out reaching the audiences that they should reach? And what are their feedback?
Yeah, so, the team has been doing a good job at the start of the season talking about the forecast, what's expected. I kind of wanted to go back a little bit to what John was talking about. A lot of, I like to call them amateur. I'm sure there's a specific title for them, John, in terms of people on YouTube giving out weather. One of the things that we've been kind of really tackling and wanting to share with the community and continue to share with the community is official weather sources for the Cayman Islands. Because it's extremely important that as you're talking about getting ready for the season, as something approaches, that, we all know that the population's curious. We get information from a lot of different places. We're not saying that you won't do that or shouldn't do that, but that you trust the information that's coming from official sources. So I just kind of wanted to go back to that. We know people are in those areas and they're listening. We're actually going to be pushing out content throughout the rest of the season that's specifically about getting ready. Some of the messages that I think most people tend to not think about is that, the makeup of our population. So those of us who've been through this a couple of times, we feel quite comfortable to know what we need to do. But there are many, many people on island who call this home, who've never been through a very strong storm or don't know how to prepare. So we spend a lot of time explaining the things that you should have in your kit. We have robust websites. There's lots of social media. There'll be a number of other pieces that are printed that are sent out throughout the season. We also work with various departments to get that information to individuals who may be vulnerable or get information slightly more traditional. So there's a multifaceted way that we continue to tell the public how to be prepared. One of the simple messages that we'll be pushing very strong this year is have a radio. We know it's not something that people tend to have anymore. We do everything on our phones or on our computer, but in the midst of a storm, you want to save batteries and you still need to get that information. And we know radio works. So there's some, we have key messages, what to have in your hurricane kit, how to stay prepared. But then we're particularly focused on those individuals who may not understand what preparation means just because they haven't experienced it before. So you'll see us spending a lot of time in areas where we feel new residents may actually be getting information as well.
Okay, very good.
And then I know Danny would be remiss if I didn't mention NEANS. We continue to tell individuals do sign up for the emergency alert system. It's a way to get information. So during, we would use that system, not necessarily, well, we would not use it for preparation, but we definitely use it for the alert phases. So it's something that you should have. And the site for all of this information will be Cayman Prepared. So we continue to support our friends in hazard management. That's the main website for information about preparing for hazards in the Cayman Islands. In the event of a threat, you will see that site change very quickly to giving you all information you need, all in the same space, live updates, as well as contact information. And the public is familiar with that website, so we feel strongly like that's the right avenue for people to continue to look at. It's caymanprepared.ky.
Yes. Before I go to Danny, as the owner of a media house, I just want to know that we have a responsibility to make sure that we get the right information at the right time. Sometimes we get tempted to get clickbait, so we get activity on our websites. And I understand the business model for that as well. But we have to take responsibility. We have to act responsible, especially in these disasters, because we can make it worse by putting the wrong information out at the wrong time. And so as a media owner, I'm going to take responsibility, and I'm going to set the example and say, guys, we need to do the right thing. We need to know the source and stick with the source and depend on the source and stop making up our own stories to try and get clicks, and which happens. And I'm honest with it. So, so as media, we're going to take our responsibility seriously.
And to that point, our team is always available to the media. And you guys know that we continue to ensure you have access directly to us. So, even if it's a matter of you're feeling very pressured about information, you can come directly to us so we can give you as much as possible. No, of course, we're going to be accurate, but we're here for the media as well. Like, I think everybody needs to realize that it's not a closed off type of situation. We work in partnership with you.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Danny, hazard management. How do you manage hazards, especially in hurricane season? Yes, we're thinking about hurricanes right now, but you might have an earthquake. These things happen. You might have another disaster. How do you cope? Do you have an assistant that will take over for the hurricane season, or you're still in charge? You still have the groups coming together. How do you manage this?
Okay, so we have a saying here at Hazard Management that teamwork makes the dream work, right? So I think, it's a massive collaboration. Yes, Hazard Management, coordinating body of the structure, and we do this day in, day out, no matter what it is. And I know back in the day, people used to say to me, what do you do for the other 6 months of the year when you haven't got hurricanes? And I'm like, we are multi-hazard. So any hazard that happens in Cayman, we are pretty much involved. Even the other day with the explosion, there's so many different aspects of it. Migration, Cuban migration, we've been involved heavily with that over the last year and a half or so. So there's lots of things that go on behind the scenes that no one sees, be it exercises, trainings, shelters. We have 19 shelters across the 3 islands, and hazard management is responsible for all those shelters. Relief supplies. We have containers full of relief supplies. Even the emergency field hospital from COVID belongs to NEAC. Oh, beautiful list. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ralph. So there's a lot that goes on behind managing hazards. But again, going back to it, it is about teamwork. We have to work together. We have to make sure we work well with our colleagues, because there's one thing, when we can, in normal days, blue skies like today, or grayish skies today, you can get on with your job. But unless we have those great relationships, it really does go a bit south during an emergency, because you're exhausted. You may not slept for a number of hours. You're just on the go. So I think those kind of relationships, and I know, Anisha and John, we're all joined at the hip during any emergency, and we do have a great relationship. So I think it's those relationships across the whole national emergency structure. And it's not just the Emergency Operations Centre. We have the executive, which is the cabinet and the Commissioner of Police, and obviously is chaired by the Premier and the Governor. We have the policy group, which is deputies and so forth, chief officers, and chaired by the Deputy Governor. And then, of course, we have the council. So there's 4 different groups there that we have to help coordination of through hazard management. But those relationships are really very solid. And we're also very keen to make sure that mental health is very much part of that. So mental health's been incorporated into the structure as about 3 years ago. Ironically, just bore COVID, we worked very, very closely with Dipna Carter, and who's HSA psychiatric nurse, and she's been a massive valuable asset, because not only does she make decisions with the mental health hat on, but also she kind of gives us a nod when we're not making much sense of, if we need that support ourselves, because I think, none of us are superheroes, and we all need that support. And I think it's that, that those kind of friendships or relationships that can say, okay, I think it's time you took a break and you need to go because you need time out, but even if it's 10 minutes just to breathe and just have a bit of mental health check-in with yourself. But just go back to what Anisha was talking about in regards to communications. I mean, there's so much that goes on at this time of year, but also throughout the year. But we're in schools the whole time doing school drills. In March, we did a significant number of emergency drills in schools for earthquakes and tsunamis. I know for this month we've been in the DIY shops across the island every weekend to talk about people's elevation and where they'd shelter, and obviously downloading the NEEDS app. So a lot of that community outreach. In service clubs, we do a lot of work in, going to Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, and so forth, making sure that everyone there's, ready to go and prepared for whatever it is. And again, this next couple of weeks, we've been doing, and the last couple of weeks, a lot of work with elderly people. So you're talking about the more vulnerable people, obviously elderly people, caretakers of the elderly. So there's about 8 to 10 presentations with the elderly. One's happening tonight, actually. And that's very much in collaboration with the Department of Children and Family Services. So there's a lot going on. But talking about the targeting and the messaging, I mean, we have to make sure that stuff, when we talk about hurricane season, it's not boring. The last thing we want is the same old messaging every year that everyone just rolls their eyes and go, oh God, not you guys again, please, give us a break. So we're trying to make our messaging, again, with the help of the whole comms team, very dynamic and very sort of like fresh and funky. And every year it's got, how do we palette this? How's it stomachable again this year? Slightly different change on the wording. And one of the great things, again, work that we did was led by the comms team, was a survey this year about hurricane messaging. And again, a lot of that's been targeting. What we're doing now is as a result of the feedback we got there. So we are always listening to the public as to how they're hearing it and if they're listening to it. And again, how we can make our services better. We always want that feedback.
Okay, thank you. Very well. Before I go to Mr. John for this next question, how do the superheroes deal with their family lives in a crisis?
I won't lie to you.
Letting you go first.
I won't lie to you. Well, I will say, when we had the earthquake in 2020, my stepdaughter called me up and she's like, have you forgotten about me? Because it was after hours. I think it was at 4 o'clock. And I'm like, now we have a no lying policy in our house. So I'm like, well, I have to be frank. I said, my headspace is in my job, and I don't want. I relied on her teachers to make sure that she was safe. Yeah. But it's often a really difficult balance, and unfortunately, often the family have to take the back seat when it comes to emergencies. But the more prepared they are and ready to go, and we make sure that's happening throughout the whole year, and that they're self-sufficient and they get on with it, the better. And I think it's just so important. But unfortunately, the job is a job, and this is kind of what we signed up for when we signed up for it.
Anisha,
it takes a village. That's all I say. Our son, the dog, is very used to their family members just showing up and say, "Hey, you're coming with us." In our household, we have 2 superheroes, so the dog and the son's usually being taken care of by someone else. So I'd say it's definitely the village. But to Danny's point, it's what we sign up for. It is exciting. It makes the job rewarding as well. So it's not something that, I'm whining about. But it takes a village. And I will always say that people need to have strong support in whatever role they're in. But definitely in this one, you need that.
Thank you. Mr. John? How do you manage? You're in there 24/7, sometimes 36 hours. How do you manage family life?
Well, I have 2 families. I have my blood family. I got my national service family, and they got my back. I really haven't produced a weather forecast for the Cayman Islands since about 2014. And I've got a fantastic team behind me. It's headed up by my chief meteorologist, Mr. Kerry Powery. And if there's somebody that wears a Superman cape, it is Mr. Powery. He has all of my respect in the world, and yet he's not the only one. Regretfully, this year, as of the end of June, change will be coming to the National Weather Service, in that the individual that I have worked with the longest in my career will be retiring, and that's Mr. Avalon Porter. So we will be wishing him. I don't think he's going to quite leave. He's going to probably come back or something.
Okay.
But it's a sign of the changing times. In fact, one of the mistakes I made this year is I didn't go out to A.L. Thompson's to buy myself some rope to tie myself down for this year. There's a whole lot going on in the Weather Service, and getting the family dealt with is very important. I remember when Hurricane Ivan came, I was blessed in the sense that the NEOC was really the fire department. And the fire department is where my older brother worked.
Yes.
And my wife and my kids had gone up to Bordentown to ride out the hurricane. And they had an evacuation, and guess what? They all ended up down there at the Georgetown Fire Station with me. And
Yes.
that was certainly a load off my shoulder, that my family could be there with me. And I mean, regardless of during the storm, I still don't have time to spend with them. But, it is what it is. So,
Yes.
I have to admit, during any hurricane, John, I think I become your work wife. And I know I'm much bossier to John than our Kathy is. So I think he's always happy at the all clear. Not so much the all clear, but the fact that I'm no longer bossing him around.
Well, I've heard the passion and the commitment. I want to thank you all for what you do and the sacrifices that you've made. And I think the country is a better place with individuals such as yourself. Mr. John, next question. I have a concern about complacency. We get all ready for a hurricane or storm. It doesn't happen. The next time around, people become complacent. Is that something that you're concerned about as well?
always. Amazingly enough, I started my career in the mid 1980s, and the top thing on our plate at that time was the fact that we had not been hit by a major storm for a while. And so we were very concerned about complacency, about people not taking things, taking the threat very seriously. And I dare say, since we've become a National Weather Service and hazards management is formed and what have you, I've seen some storms that I've gone through, and Foster's has basically had to, I don't want to say kick them out the door, okay, but they have people, residents of the country, going into Foster's when tropical storm force or winds are hitting, okay? And if you want to define complacency, that's how you define it. Because the reality of the situation is that you don't know if those heavy thunder showers might hit, and you might not be able to drive safely back to your home. You might be just taking into consideration just the storm force winds. What about places like South Sound, where the sea came across the road on a number of our recent storms? Okay, did your plan to get back home, might it have gone through that region? Okay, the gully in Savannah. Okay, we had an incident. It's with Hurricane Mitch, and Hurricane Mitch didn't come here, but it was 200 miles away and cost us about $14 million worth of damage. But one of the things that was very, very, very significant, and people need to listen to this very carefully, and that is Hurricane Mitch activated the gully. Okay? And it's more than just the road flooding. It's the water flowing like a river. Okay. And there was an incident that I remembered when Hurricane Mitch was, and that was there was a very small car carrying a family crossed by Domino's Pizza where the gully comes out. And the force of the moving water was pushing the car into the trench on the side of the road. And the police and the fire department had to come there and rescue them. Okay? These things you need to take into consideration. You cannot wait until the last minute. It is not advisable. Okay? During the storm, one of the things I preached in terms of some of our meetings is if you're deciding to go in a shelter, you make sure that you're in that shelter before those tropical storm force winds hit. All right. When Ivan was here, we had people crying out to the NEOC, come and save us. And the emergency people at the fire department, if they now go out to save you, they endanger their lives. Okay. You need to be in shelters. Those decisions need to be made before the storm, not when the storm is hitting. All right. And of course, because we have things like rapid development, you should always be thinking this is a major storm. Always. I don't want to say I don't care what the National Weather Service says, because I'm pretty sure you listen to me. But if we say it's a tropical wave, a tropical depression, or a tropical storm, you might go like, oh, that's weak. Well, what did Grace teach us? Grace taught us that what? Don't take a tropical storm for granted. Okay? So we need to respect nature soon, and we need to not be complacent that we are going to cause other people to endanger their correct.
Yeah. And your points are very, very well taken, and I encourage everyone to take those warnings very seriously, because we never know. Well, folks, it's been a real pleasure for me to be here. I wish I could be here for another 45 minutes, but maybe we can have a part two to talk about a lot more of these topics. I think is very important. So if you can give me your final words, each of you, and what your wishes for this hurricane season will be. Starting with you, Anisha.
Thanks for having us, Ralph. This is a great conversation. It's always good to talk about these topics, and with my friends from Hazard Management and John over at National Weather Service. So thank you for the opportunity. From our side of communications, I really want to urge people to tune into official sources, absolutely, and continue to prepare for the season. There's lots of messaging, and people do add information in the absence of information. So being able to go back to check to where the official news is most important. So I just want to leave that as a tidbit that always go to, whether it's caymanprepared.ky. We'll also have messages on gov.ky. Radio Cayman is our official partner when it comes to hurricane season. And we encourage our media partners to stay connected to us so we can ensure we're sharing accurate and timely information. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're most welcome. Danny.
I agree. I mean, again, everything's been said today, making sure you know what your hazard at your home is. So your elevation of your home, if you're on the coast, know what your risks are, because again, you can't wait till the last minute to be running to a shelter. As John says, you have to be there. It's first come, first serve. So at the end of the day, that we only have 8% of shelter capacity in Grand Cayman. We're working with a lot of the private companies, but still at this point, public shelters only house 8%. So you need to be there early. You need to be bunkered down. You need to have your supplies. You need to know what to take to a shelter, and also have your hurricane supplies at home. There's nothing worse than scrambling at the supermarket, 24 hours beforehand, because you just don't need that stress. Make sure the kids are involved in the plan. Make sure that the animals are involved in the plan. Make sure you're looking out for your neighbors and the vulnerable people around you. It's just so critical. People around you may need more help than you do. So make sure you're counting that into your time management before a storm. As Anisha says, there's some great resources on our website, caymanprepared.ky. We also have Facebook and social media, Twitter and Instagram. So there's a lot of information coming out there, but we're really pleading with the public just to be ready for the season, and don't take anything for granted. Don't be complacent, and just again, we're here to help. So anything you want from hazard management planning wise, we're very much here to help, and go to any service clubs or schools or whatever it is. Just call us up and invite us in, and we can tailor it to your own specific needs. But thank you, Ralph, and thank you all your listeners.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. John, any final words?
Well, I'd like to, there are two things that I want to just touch on real quick. Number one, let's big up our superwoman there, Danny Coleman, and HMCI, and the fantastic job that they've done over there, and the level of enthusiasm that they've got for their work. Cayman has a very solid hurricane plan, okay? And you've got a very dedicated set of disaster managers that really have invested a lot in there. That plan takes into consideration just about every aspect of life. I mean, from animals to medicine to all kinds of things. So the plan is there to help everybody, and just don't be a problem to the plan. Okay, things like going in shelters early, protecting your house, and taking care of things. You know, these are on you, but the disaster managers have done their job. Okay, whether it's issuing warnings or all of the public awareness and everything else that we do. Okay, the second part is that I know we're talking about an average season, and over the last number of years, we've been having some that have been blowing the season totals away. We've been setting numerous records from way back in 2005 and what have you. Always remember, it only takes one. Okay, don't look at the forecast and go, well, we're going to have an average season, or we're going to have below an average season. We got El Nino, so we're safe. No. Only takes one. The season might give you one Category 5 hurricane, and then the Hurricane Center will tell me, hey, John, you had an average season. But that Category 5 hurricane came to the Cayman Islands. God forbid. And from our point of view, we would never consider that an average season.
Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate you. Well, folks, I really appreciate all of you coming on today and highlighting these important topics and educating me. I've learned so much. I'm going to go back to my study book and get ready for the hurricane season. I hope to have you back again sometime, maybe in about a month or two, when we see some activity, or maybe not, but it's always about being prepared. Thank you very much. I want to wish you a very good weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining Cayman Conversations as we seek to elevate the level of media conversations with our special guests from our walk of life. Remember to like, share, and follow Caymanian Times social media pages. Don't forget to pick up your copy of our Wednesday and Friday newspapers at locations across the islands. Cayman Conversations is a production of the Caymanian Times newspaper. Have a great evening, and remember to drive safely on our roads. Goodbye.